Okay, welcome back to A Few Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I'm going to be looking at the 2018 movie The Predator, and I'm going to be starting off with a tomato meter score of 32% and an audience score of 34%. Now, of course, The Predator is the latest, as of 2019, Predator movie in the franchise. And I'm only calling it a franchise because other people have called it a franchise. You almost can't consider a lot of the Predator movies to be part of any cohesive franchise. You've got everything from straight up serious action sci-fi movies to comedy, to unintentional comedy, and to the spin-offs, of course, Alien versus Predator. Overall, though, I'm just going to lump it all together and call it the Predator franchise. Now, if we start off with some history here, the original movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't really need an introduction, but let's just take a look at what we have on Rotten Tomatoes. We have today, as of October 2019, we have an 81% tomato meter score with the so-called professional critics, and we have an 87% audience score. Now, this movie has obviously aged very well. It's still as highly regarded today as it was back in, the late 80s. Certainly, a lot of this is the mystique of Schwarzenegger and some of the other characters that also showed up in other Schwarzenegger films, action films of the 80s. And, you can't fault The Predator. I mean, you can't fault Predator, the first movie. I don't know if that's intentional, that this latest outing called The Predator is an intentional title misuse to get people to think that even in casual conversation they're referring to The Predator as Predator. They are certainly not the same movie. In fact, the original movie Predator was an action movie that became, in the course of its running time, a sci-fi and horror movie. Action, sci-fi, horror, they're blended together perfectly. There was some comedy. There were, of course, one-liners from Arnold Schwarzenegger, which were, to be found in every Schwarzenegger movie after this, including The Terminator. Predator is a masterpiece. It's worth seeing today. I can sit through it today, no problem. Now, when we take a look at the newest outing, The Predator, obviously, it's fallen from grace. Now, you can't say, the reason I brought up before that this is only the Predator franchise in a loose way is because this movie in particular, although directed by Shane Black, who was an actual cast member of the first Predator film, he played Hawkins. Although directed by somebody who you think would know better, this movie comes across as an attempt at an action comedy or straight up comedy action. It's hard to tell which, because the comedy part fails and the action part fails. But to me, it seems like it was intended as a straight-up comedy. This isn't publicly acknowledged. The director, I think, publicly would acknowledge that he attempted a type of Marvel-esque humor in the movie, but he certainly didn't intend it as being a comedy, like a straight-up action comedy. But I watched it for the first time last night, and I would say that, not knowing anything about the previous Predator films, this would strike me as a failed straight-up action comedy, or an attempt at one. Now, I think if the charisma between the actual characters and the writing had been a little bit better, it could have worked. It could have been a 3.5 star, maybe even a 4-star comedy. That would have really disrespected the original Predator fans. But it would have worked as a comedy, no question about it. And I'm going to maintain that opinion throughout when I look at these rotten reviews. I'm sure that I'm not alone. Now let's get right into the rotten audience reviews. And of course, some aren't going to be rotten, but a lot are going to be tongue-in-cheek, like this first one, which gives it a 5-star rating from apparently 6 hours ago. The Predator are amazing action and acting. Best Boyd Holbrook, best movie. My rating 10 out of 10. Now I consider that tongue-in-cheek, an attempt, a bad grammar attempt at a sarcastic tongue-in-cheek comment. So I'm going to leave it at that. We have half a star. Poor acting, plot, CGI, and above all, it's the worst of all the previous Predator films that came before it. Utter garbage. Now, this half a star, I would say, would be coming from a fan that took this as a serious Predator movie. They expected to go into this scene, something along the lines of the first movie. It just slapped them right in the face because this was a poorly executed comedy. 1 star. This dismal reboot of the Predator franchise needlessly retcons various points from the previous films, all to its own detriment. The film boasts feeble acting, unlikable and cliched characters, cringeworthy dialogue, and a laughably stupid plot that barely even attempts to make sense. I don't know what they were thinking. Well, I've already answered that. I think more than one person involved in the production saw this as an attempt at comedy. And that's where you get the laughably stupid plot, except for the part that the plot's just not enough laughably stupid. I can list some of the ways that it comes across as a comedy. For example, the female scientist character shooting herself in her own foot with her tranq gun and slipping and falling on the rooftop of a bus because of that. There are other scenes. For example, the villain of the movie shoots himself in the head with a Predator weapon, and it's straight up action comedy, except it's just not set up and executed right for a laugh, but otherwise it would be straight up action comedy. The villain in this movie is not actually the Predator or even the super giant Predator that comes along a little bit later in the film. The villain in this movie is actually just called a government agent, or in the listing on Rotten Tomatoes, he's straight up listed as government agent because he doesn't really have a name or purpose. You don't know what government agency he supposedly works for. You just know that he's played as an over-the-top mustache twirling type of villain, only instead of twirling his mustache, he's got a toothpick in his mouth at all times, kind of reminiscent of a character that might be in the first movie, but just played totally over the top. He's a know-it-all. He's just basically a straight-up psychopath, and he's somehow got government authority to capture the Predator ship. That's what he wants to do in this movie, get the technology for the government, supposedly. But he comes across as a comedy character that isn't written well for comedy, but you can see how he could work in a comedy. The villain, again, isn't the Predator, and that's another, I think, aspect of the film that rubs the fans the wrong way. They went into a Predator movie with that title expecting, the big bad to be, the horror elements of the creature, the alien creature, the Predator. Instead, the big bad is this toothpick-chewing character that's known as simply government agent. Again, another comedy aspect is there are Predator dogs of a sort, like alien type Predator dogs, and they were also seen in a previous Predator movie called Predators. That's with an S, it's plural. In this one, the Predator dogs are kind of, they're villain type creatures. They're henchmen of the big bad Predator, except it's seen where it turns into comedic relief when one of these Predator dogs is euthanized with what looks like a cattle bolt gun, and after being lobotomized by this cattle bolt gun, he becomes like a comic pet of sorts to the main characters. Again, this would work perfectly in a straight-up comedy action, but this wasn't presented as a comedy, and the dialogue still takes itself seriously. Let's move on. 1 star. This dismal reboot of the Predator franchise needlessly retcons various points from the previous films, all to its own detriment. I read this one before, so before I embarrass myself too much, let's move on to this 3-star review. Losing the charm the previous movie had, where it had potential to be unique in the series, The Predator does fall a little short with unpredictable action scenes and cliches, but did offer my view with funny characters and great amounts of violence, probably making it the most violent movie in the series. I can understand how it may upset people, but I find it a popcorn flick, bad but fun to watch. I agree with this. I don't agree giving it 3 stars, but I agree with the point of view that this is kind of fun to watch if you're expecting a comedy film. And it's got like the most violence of any of the recent Predator films that I can recall, with gratuitous blood splashing, across the walls and even perhaps on the camera lens at one point. And it comes across again as comedy, like comedy horror in the way, comic booky comic horror where, blood is splashing around like it's, cheap fake blood. It's not gross as so much as it's failed comedy. It's certainly over the top. Again, the characters don't seem to be traumatized by it. I mean, they react, well, wow, this is really gross, but they're not traumatized by it in a horror way. It's more like played up as action humor, even the blood splashes. Let's move on. 3 stars. Actually, a fairly funny and captivating movie. I kind of agree, but see, now I'm going to give it, if I had to give it a star rating here, I would say this is 2 stars. Because if it had just been written a little more on the nose for the comedy, I think it could have worked. I mean, it would have made me laugh out loud, and it barely got a chuckle out of me here and there, so I don't consider it a 3-star. I would give it 2 stars. 2 stars. Couldn't tell if it was a comedy or something I was supposed to take seriously. I agree with this. I went into it with an open mind. I had heard other people's reviews, certainly on YouTube, more than a year ago, that told me they considered it to be garbage. Now I went in with a total open mind, and again, it just came across to me as an action comedy that the comedy didn't work right. I think it could have worked right. Looking back on it, it's Shane Black directing this, and Shane Black, to me, I know him as, of course, Hawkins in the original Predator, but I also know that he was the director of Iron Man 3. Now, Iron Man 3 came across to me like that as well, where the comedy was, it was a big factor that he was going for. And even though it was a Marvel film and should have, those Marvel jabs of humor, Shane Black's attempt at the humor came across a little too open and heavy-handed, and it didn't make me laugh like it probably should have. This reminded me of that. It reminded me of comedy that's just not executed well. And, I guess if I were coming into this movie with a blank slate and hadn't seen the original, I might be thinking this was a straight-up action comedy that just wasn't funny. 3.5 stars. Really fun. This is rewatchable. It could be rewatchable if you drink the second time around, maybe. 3 stars. It's Predator, but played for laughs and easy watch. I agree, it's played for laughs, but yet it wasn't marketed that way, and it didn't actually work quite right. 2 stars. A missed opportunity. I agree. I think that as an attempt to be a serious Predator movie, it had no shot at all. But as an attempted action comedy, it did miss an opportunity. It could have been good. 1 star. What a waste of my time. Acting was terrible. Storyline was even worse. I agree the acting was pretty bad, and I think that was because the director wanted this cast of Army vets to come across as some kind of, comedy, action comedy where they would play off of each other and yuck it up, and it was just a little too much, and the jokes didn't land funny. I mean, you could see where the attempt was, but none of these characters had charisma with each other, and when you got them together, they attempted to, bounce jokes off of each other, but it failed. It was just miscast. If it had been cast just a little bit differently, the comedy would have been funny. I consider also, on that note, that there was a scene that really bogged the movie down, and that was in which the characters all ended up at a motel of sorts, and there was some kind of biker convention going on, and they just kind of sat around, and I couldn't tell if the point of this part of the movie was that they were trying to figure out what to do, regroup and how to fight the big bad predator, or they were waiting for the science lady character to come out of her tranquilizer-induced coma, and she was going to tell them what to do. But it felt a little bit weird because they just killed time here, and the plot came to, the action part of the plot came to a complete standstill, and I couldn't figure out what they were trying to do. Again, they had everybody in a room, and they were trying to make a comedy scene with science lady Olivia Munn's character being, unconscious on a bed, and all these action war vets or military vets were, they came across as like teenage boys unsure how to, position things for when she woke up. And just like, they came across as 12-year-old boys trying to, hang out with the first woman they've ever met. And it was really weird, and it brought the whole story to a standstill, and the comedy itself failed. Now, I think if these characters had had the charisma together, this would have been funny again, and this could have worked in an action comedy. But again, it just choked the action down. So I wasn't sure what the director was trying to do here. He had two of the characters outside on lawn chairs, kind of, I don't know if they were sitting outside the pool at the motel, or it was a scene of that. In that fashion, and they kind of just talked to each other about who they were, and it just came off as boring, and it wasn't funny at all. So here the plot just kind of died in this section. It could have been cut from the movie. Again, it could have worked as a comedy if it were funny, but it wasn't written to be funny. It's like the movie couldn't figure out when to be funny and when not to be funny, and it was schizophrenic in that way. Half a star. This movie was the worst thing that happened to me in 2018. It could have been. It's, maybe for you it was. Half a star. This movie is an insult to the original Predator movie, and that kid is so annoying. I agree, if you're thinking that this is a serious Predator movie in any way, it comes off as insulting. But if you see it as an action comedy, if you get that vibe from it right away, it's not insulting at all. It just comes across as boring. 3.5 stars. Not an awful film by any account. The premise is poor, but the action and good performances from the cast managed to make it a decent ride all the way to the end, which sadly ruined the movie. The ending made so little sense that it made the rest of the film seem pointless and showed how weak the plot was. Some of the characters that were so well crafted for the film didn't have nearly enough screen time and left you wanting more, while the whole bad guy government organization plot line was just dumb. Now here I agree on one point that it was a decent ride, because if this film had been totally bad, if it was a complete disaster, I would have not have finished it. I would have just shut it off, or I would have been so bored that I changed the channel to something else. But I had other options, and I continued to watch this all the way through because something about it worked enough to keep me watching, just to find out what crazy things would happen next. And so I think this could have been a passable action comedy. Half a star. Massive cliche. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. Predator crashes during military operation, yawn, all the places on Earth, and his son happens to be a brainiac who can understand the technology. Swearing a lot, don't make it more cooler, badass. Too much comedy, not scary or dark at all. Misfits don't work at all. Wish I'd read the reviews. First, could have wrote something better myself. I agree. The miscasting on the misfit military vets, it kind of reminds me in a way of Suicide Squad, except they don't have powers. They're just like trying to be sarcastic and bounce weirdness off each other. It failed. I think that it was really weird that the protagonist of the film, his son happened to be autistic, and this autism somehow gave him some genius ability to understand and interact with Predator technology. That was corny, but again, it could have worked in an action comedy movie. It didn't work in a serious movie, unfortunately. 1.5 stars, total crap. Another Hollywood movie that, like Ghostbusters before, it fails to understand the audience or the source material, about as bland as you can get. Not bland enough to keep me from finishing it, but I think the comedy just didn't work. Unlike Ghostbusters, I think Ghostbusters, the remake, the all-female remake that was remade to try to put a political point, to put a girl power point on Ghostbusters, and that's why that failed, aside from bad comedy. But this is just an attempt to straight up make an action comedy movie by somebody. I'm alleging it's the director, but it might have been others on the team as well. And it just fails. It doesn't get the laughs. It doesn't have enough laugh factor. If the audience were laughing out loud at this, it would have been a success. 2 stars. It's got some humor, but it's a messy movie. I couldn't watch it again. I agree. I have no interest in watching it again. If I had laughed more, maybe I would have watched it again. It showed us a few things in the Predator franchise we hadn't seen before. It showed us more alien technology. It did humorous things with the alien technology. For example, using the shield mechanics of the alien ship to decapitate, to cut people's arms and legs off. And in fact, that was a major point in how the Predator was defeated, by his own shield technology, where it severed his arms and legs. Some of this was straight up funny, the way it was done, except just not enough to get the laugh out loud factor going. 5 stars. Was amazing. Very impressed how much I enjoyed it. I don't take that serious. Half a star. Was this supposed to be a really bad comedy? See, that's again, I think this was supposed to be a comedy. It wasn't meant to be a bad comedy. It's just that whoever was responsible for the writing, they didn't know how to write it into a comedy. They had some of the elements, but not enough to get the laugh out loud thing going. 1 star. Utterly horrid movie. As a writer who wrote this script, it is an utter disgrace. He's asking who wrote this script. Well, obviously it was somebody that wasn't good at writing comedy. If they had brought a comedy writer in here, this would have been funnier than hell. Half a star. Simply the worst film ever. Not funny. Terrible acting and dialogue. Zero tension. And the most stupid, ill-thought-out plot I have ever seen put on film. Now I'll pause here in regards to something towards the beginning of the movie that I found a waste of footage. You had a scene in which the misfits, the military veterans, they're prisoners. They show up at this military base coincidentally at the same time the Predator is escaping from this military base. There was a lot of wasted footage in which they drove around on the bus and the Predator kind of ran around on gangways and across the rooftops. And there were no attempts to make this work. I mean, it was like pointless filler material. You had the Predator music playing like it was all serious and scary and dramatic, showing the Predator running across rooftops and the vets in the bus reacting to the fact that there was an alien out there. But it was completely boring and pointless. And the fact that the Predator score was playing in the background so seriously while Olivia Munn's character was running around on the rooftops chasing after the Predator with a trank gun. It came across as trying to make you laugh, but the comedy just wasn't there. It just became boring. And again, it felt like a waste of footage, like they were filming this just to add another 5 or 10 minutes to the film. Continuing on, writer must have been on drugs, drunk, and possibly suffering from some sort of brain problem. I didn't expect much, but this is so bad my eyes melted in my sockets whilst watching. Get to the Choppa's line was dreadful. Thanks Shane Black. On a side note, I love original Predator. Always thought a good idea would be to set it in some historical conflict. Okay, maybe. But again, I like how he mentions in this review the get to the Choppa's line, where in the first Predator movie, Arnold had said, get to the Choppa. And it was, in regards to the last few survivors escaping to a helicopter to take them away. And in this one, it was redone as one character telling the others to get to these motorcycles that happen to be parked in a parking lot nearby. Get to the Choppas. It was really pathetic. Again, it could have worked in an action comedy, but it just came across as something out of time and place. 2 stars. I'm going to start this off by saying that I'm not a huge fan of the Predator movies. I'm more into Alien, but I've liked all the movies I've seen from the series. I like the original a lot. I haven't seen the second one. Alien vs. Predator is a guilty pleasure of mine. I haven't seen the second one, and I thought Predators was okay. As for The Predator, it was definitely a bad movie, but I actually thought it was pretty funny. A lot of the intentional Marvel-style humor fell pretty flat for me, but there's another aspect. Yeah, again, I agree. It comes across as a comedy, an action comedy, but the Marvel type humor just didn't work. Shane Black did a Marvel movie, and the humor also kind of fell flat in that too, as I mentioned. So again, I think it's the problem where the intention was to make an action comedy, but the director, whoever was on his team, they just weren't capable of pulling that comedy part of it off. Um, 5 stars, greatest Predator film, action-packed. Haha, I think that's meant to be funny. 1.5 star, worst of the series, a letdown. 1.5 stars, reminded me of a cheesy 80s horror flick. Yeah, except the budget was too big for that. Cheesy. Yeah, it was a little bit cheesy. In fact, I'll mention another part that came across as comedy. The protagonist's son, who was somehow gifted autistically with the understanding the predator technology, he actually went trick-or-treating with the Predator helmet on his strapped to his face as a Halloween mask. And in one scene, the Predator technology blew up a kid that had thrown something at him from a balcony. And it came across as straight. That almost got me to laugh out loud. It just wasn't quite there. It almost got me to just flat out laugh out loud like this were an action comedy. It was so ridiculous. I think if they had done more of that, more of the trick-or-treating with the Predator mask, it would have been fantastic. And in fact, I'm struggling right now not to laugh thinking about it. Again, a wasted opportunity, because as an action comedy, that would have been comedy gold, playing up the Halloween aspect of this more. And that's another weird thing about this movie. It's set on the night of Halloween. Kids are going trick-or-treating, and yet it's only taken advantage of in one small point of this movie. That could have been such a factor with a lot of the movie, the fact that this was on Halloween. When you look back on the movie after you finish it and you think, hey, you know, this crazy series of events that didn't quite work, they all happened on Halloween night. That's pretty over the top. I mean, again, it was a wasted opportunity. Somebody put that in there as a comedy factor, and then, you know, Shane Black just didn't know what to do with it. But yes, people, this entire Predator action movie takes place on Halloween night. You know, that probably should have been put into the marketing for this film, and that would have told people this is a straight-up attempt at an action comedy, but it wasn't. 1 star, it's whack. I'd rather watch Predator 2 any day than this junk. I don't know, Predator 2, I really didn't care for it. I saw it in the theater, so I'd rather not watch that one either, personally. I prefer the original. 3 stars, occasionally brutally violent sci-fi with a surprisingly flippant sense of humor. Keegan-Michael Key and Olivia Munn. Worth a diversionary rental or DVR viewing if you are looking for something out of the ordinary. I agree with this, except the 3 stars. If I had laughed out loud, you know, at least a few times, I might have given it 3 stars, but it wasn't that funny. 4.5 stars. For a movie that has a fair number of sequels, remakes, this is actually a good film. Well, if you compare it to, say, Alien vs. Predator Requiem, that horrific thing, that was an attempt at a straight-up horror that didn't work. This is a little different. It's an attempt at an action comedy that didn't work. It's almost like the owners of the franchise can't figure out what they want to do with Predator. It started out as a straight-up action sci-fi with horror elements, and at this date in 2019, nobody can figure out what it should be. I kind of like the action comedy thing. I think that came the closest to succeeding, but it just didn't hit. And you know, the thing about comedy is it's only a different slight tweak in the timing and the delivery of the lines. not even necessarily the lines themselves that make something funny or not. And you need somebody that knows how to make comedy hit and make people laugh, and they just didn't have somebody like that. 1 star, absolutely awful. No common sense, no base security, no intelligence, no seriousness, no point, pointless, stupid, annoying, repetitive, and so many more awful things. Just skip it entirely and do not expect the next movie to be anything more than an embarrassing mess that makes bad action movies like Mechanic Resurrection look like Shakespeare. +1/2 stars for some good forest action towards the ending. Yeah, I think it didn't fail as an action movie. It failed as a comedy movie. If you had just, like I said, if you had just caused people to laugh out loud, there's nothing wrong with the action. It was completely good, completely passable. 2.5 stars, sometimes good, but mostly inept. It could have been better in several spots, but it's just an okay story. It was all studio meddling. While not bad, it had some humor thrown in that wasn't needed. Some good ideas were brought about, but most of it doesn't go anywhere. The reason why it is so low is because of the ending. You can see the ship fly away, and it would have been several miles off of where it landed. The girl who was coined in to save the day wouldn't have been there at all. Okay, but again, if this was an action comedy, all of this would have been forgivable. Yes, it has time distance problems. It has a lot of problems, but if the comedy had landed, if people had laughed, it would have been all well within the range of acceptable. 0.5 star, trash, absolute garbage. Shane Black should not be allowed near another film, as this movie will likely affect viewers in a similar way as the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones had on people who gazed on as it was opened. Yeah, and that's all because the laughs didn't work, in my opinion. 2 stars. Blending new mixtures always don't work out. Giving a sci-fi movie an action treatment, which was originally supposed to be scary, didn't pan out well. Horrible mixture of poor story, forgettable performances, weak characterization, and unnecessarily long stretched humors made it worse. The action sequences look decent though. It's one of those films where you already know it's bad, but nonetheless you would still watch it and have fun. Perhaps the most strong point in this one was the fun factor. I agree, the comedy just didn't work, otherwise this was entertaining enough to laugh all the way through. The parts of the comedy that really didn't work, for example, when Olivia Munn's science lady character confronted the guy that had Tourette's, and he had said to eat her pussy, and she repeated it 3 times, wondering what the hell he was talking about. You know, that's the thing where I can say straight up, they're trying a comedy routine. They're trying to go over the point. They're trying to go over the top with some similar comedy that had been in the first movie, and it just didn't work at all. It wasn't enough to make you laugh. If I had laughed out loud, I would have rated this movie much higher, but stuff like that just didn't work. 1.5 stars, was a crap movie. If you're going to call it Predator, make it about the predators, not the damn people. If I wanted it to be about humans, call it Human versus Predator. It should have ended with the predator killing the humans and leaving with the kid. Not good. Well, yeah, because you were expecting an action movie like Predator, and you got a comedy. That didn't work. Now, the other thing is that they made a point in this movie many, many times, and the joke got old, of the fact that, you know, you shouldn't call it a predator because it's actually more like a hunter or a game trophy hunter. A predator is an animal that actually kills for survival purposes. And they made a joke about this 2, 3, 4 times in the movie. It was supposed to be funny, but again, it didn't make anybody laugh. You know, riffing on its own title, riffing on the title of the whole franchise. I get what they were trying to do, but it didn't work. 5 stars, another action-packed and hilarious installment in the Predator franchise. Sarcasm, this is actually, you know, making me laugh more than the movie did. 5 stars, a great movie to watch late at night with some ice-cold lemon tea. Yeah, if it's Long Island iced tea. 1 star, worst movie I have ever seen. I am so upset that this is what the Predator franchise has become. I had 36 minutes left and I was about to quit, but I said, no, stick with it. Wish I would have quit. Olivia Munn apparently is not only a molecular biologist who studies genomes and life and planetary data, but she is also a Navy SEAL. From the first instance of her running across a bridge and jumping onto a moving prisoner bus and firing from the hip at the predator, yeah, and then she shoots herself with her own trank gun. It's like action comedy. It's straight up action comedy. In fact, it reminds me of towards the end of the movie when multiple characters jump on top of the Predator ship when the ship is flying away, and you're thinking to yourself, and this is after they've shot it a bunch of times with their machine guns to no effect, they decide to just run and jump on top like a character would do in a car chase movie, jumping on the hood of a car. It makes no sense, but in an action comedy, it makes perfect sense, and it would have been funny. And it just didn't generate the laughs. Unwatchable, even in the plane, worse than a straight-to-TV movie. And again, I'll bring up another funny part that was intended to be funny, but it wasn't. One character is impaled up high up on a tree by the big predator. Another character is impaled or incapacitated at the base of a tree across from him by the big predator, and they both look at each other stuck in their positions knowing that they're going to die a slow drawn out death while they're going to bleed out, and they both raise their pistols at each other and execute each other. Now, that would have been straight up comedy in a comedy movie. It's making fun of itself. It's making fun of its own movie. It's also making fun of, for example, a similar scene in Aliens, the movie that's definitely not a comedy. It would have been fantastic if they had done it right, if the delivery had been a little different. I would have laughed out loud there. In fact, I felt like I wanted to laugh out loud there when they executed each other with pistol shots, but something about it was missing. It just didn't have enough to get me to laugh. 3 stars. The Predator has thrilling action sequences and enjoyable cast chemistry and quips, but over-reliance on callbacks to the first film and the second film for that matter, yet we never get to know more about their home planet, I guess, from the third film, and a twist about the Predators that obviously wasn't planned when the first film was made back in the 80s, as well as being content to rely on CGI rather than people wearing prosthetics, make this yet another failed attempt to make a genuinely good Predator sequel. I disagree with a lot of this because, again, they're thinking this was made to, recapture the action sci-fi horror vibe of the first movie, and it wasn't. This was an attempted action comedy. This does bring up, this review brings up something interesting about the Predator technology. In no movie do we ever get to see anything about the Predator technology, the Predator homeworld, or how they came to have all this technology, or anything about the backstory of the Predators, what they're like when they're not out hunting humans. And the reason for that, I think, is because creatures like the Predator don't work with technology, only in the most superficial ways where you don't think too hard about it. And in the first movie, you don't think hard about it at all because it's an action sci-fi with some horror. You're too busy wondering about what's going to happen with the characters and who's going to survive. You don't have time to think about if it's ridiculous that predator-type creatures would even have spaceships, or are there scientist predators, and etc. It doesn't make sense, just like the Klingons in Star Trek oftentimes don't make sense the way they're portrayed, because the fact that they're warriors and they're out doing all these warrior things doesn't quite mix with the idea of scientists inventing warp reactors and shield technology. So you're not supposed to think about it on that level. People that think they're going to go into a Predator movie and they're going to discover the backstory of the Predators, how they developed their shield technology and stuff, don't even bother, because that's not what this franchise is about. That's not what the first movie was about. You're not supposed to think that deeply about it. This isn't Star Trek. Half a star. Terrible, not scary, not funny, terrible special effects, no redeeming qualities. I totally hated this movie. 0.5 out of 5. I'll mostly agree. You're not going to find comedy, and you're not going to find scary. It fails on both. 2 stars. Cravenly jingoistic and cravenly exploitive of mental impairment. These themes mirroring one another to irresponsibly suggest that antisocial elements, whether political or psychical, are in truth our exotic saving graces. Okay, I'll stop there. Yes, part of the movie was that An autistic kid is somehow a genius. He's the next step in human evolution, and the predators want him because he's the next step in human evolution, and they want to use his superior DNA to enhance themselves. Well, that would work again in a comedy movie because we know that what we're calling autism isn't a benefit to anybody except in Hollywood movies at times. Um, Again, any species that actually seriously wanted to put autistic genes into itself would retard itself right out of having all this technology. So again, yes, I just used a bad word, guys, but get over it. It's funny. It could work in an action comedy. It just wasn't presented in a funny way. They actually attempted to present the main character's son's autism as some secret key that the predators wanted, and they didn't try to make fun of this at all, and it was ridiculous. 2.5 stars. With Shane Black directing, The Predator could have and should have been better. Instead, it's full of one-dimensional, foul-mouthed characters who compete on who the funny one is. A kid who obviously won't die, and a predator dog added to the mix. Despite all the violence and dirty jokes, this is a Predator film that is almost family friendly due to all its corniness. Yes, it comes across as a comedy. The graphic gore parts of it come across as bad attempts at comedy. And so, yeah, it gives you the feeling that the whole family could laugh at this, except it's just not funny enough. The characters are, like I said, they're attempting at some kind of foul-mouthed humor all the time, but it never lands, and so it comes across as just bizarre. Half a star. What the hell? Okay. 4 stars. The aliens are back. Starts with one crash landing on Earth, an alien with human DNA. Another alien comes after him. Good fight scenes. Disagree. 2 stars. Sophomoric and plotless. I'm no prude, but the constant profanity doesn't add anything. It felt corny. Stupid movie. Yeah, it felt corny because it wasn't funny. Half a star. I really wanted to like this movie. I've always been a big fan of Predator series. This is the first movie I rented from Redbox in 4 years. I'm sorry. I didn't check the reviews prior to it because I wanted to have an open mind. Let's just say that I wasted $175 renting this piece of junk. The acting and plot was so bad that I turned the movie off after 30 minutes disgusted. Shame on whoever approved the screenplay because they either don't care or have no idea what they're doing. Yeah, they don't know how to do an action comedy. They tried and failed. 2 stars. This is a Friday night. I'm bored. Want some action, blood, and guts type of movie with a group of friends. It wasn't bad to the point you feel like you wasted 2 hours of your life, but this remake wasn't at all necessary either. It does Predator, Predator 2, and the 2004 AVP installment no justice at all, and I contribute that all to the fact that they relied primarily on animated predators instead of the bodysuits. No, stop right there. I disagree on that. Obviously, this is coming from a fan who takes Predator, Predator 2, and the AVP movie of 2004 serious action sci-fi, and I agree they are meant to be serious action sci-fi, not comedy, but you got a comedy. That's why it failed. You got a comedy and you didn't laugh. If you had laughed out loud at this, even these serious fans, they probably would have forgiven it and said, hey, this thing was hilarious. I watch it because it's hilarious. But the comedy falls flat, so it just comes across to these fans as insulting. Let's leave it at that. Half a star. Worst punchlines. Most annoying little boy in cast. Well, the little boy was annoying because he just magically had these powers where he understood the Predator language right away. He understood how to remote control their ships. He understood exactly what they were doing, and the only thing he didn't do was speak in Predator language out loud, which would have probably happened if this had had a longer running time. It was completely ridiculous, but again, it could have worked in an action comedy. Half a star. 1.5 stars. You broke my heart, Shane Black. Shane Black, I think he should have been just a cast member of Predator, and they shouldn't have allowed him to direct movies because he doesn't seem to understand. Like, he wants to do action comedy, but he doesn't understand how to pull it off. They need to forget about him and move on to other directors that we've never heard of, because they would pull off even an action comedy better than he has. It's like he's ridden off the Predator film, not just to be in The Predator, but just to have a career at all. I mean, Shane Black, it's like he's just Hawkins in The Predator, or the first Predator movie, and he's ridden that to a Hollywood career. I have no idea how, because he can't even do action comedies. 3.5 stars, an entertaining dumb action movie, plenty of problems, but still a fun watch. Debatable. 1 star, I hated this movie. This franchise has fallen so far. Again, I touched on that at the beginning. You can't really call this a cohesive franchise, because nobody's figured out what to do with it. You can just lump every movie that has Predator in the title together and call it a franchise, but every movie's all over the place. You try to take it serious, but then it goes into comedy. You want an action adventure, and it fails on that. You just don't know where this thing is going to go. I hated this movie. Okay. 3 stars. The Predator isn't going to blow you away with a new twist, but is a solid watch at home video when you get the chance. There are plenty of laughs, especially from Keegan-Michael Key. No, I disagree. He made the most hardcore attempt at comedy, and he just had nobody to play off of. And without that, it failed. There weren't plenty of laughs, unfortunately. 0.5 star. Thanks, Shane Black, for killing my favorite franchise. 4.5 stars. Comedy was on point. Gore was awesome. Flowed together, I think. People gave it a bad score because the movie had B-level stars and was quick. Seemed like a lower budget film. I would say this is more like a cult classic in the making. No, because it wasn't funny enough. Unless something happens in the future where people's taste in comedy changes radically, which it's happened before, this isn't going to become a cult classic, because that would require people seeing this for an action comedy and actually laughing. But nobody's laughing. Maybe in 20 years, if people start laughing at it, okay, but we're not there. I don't see it. 2 stars. A lot of confusing plot points that really made me scratch my head in confusion. Yeah, because they're confusing if you expect a serious action movie as a comedy. No, it's all within the realm. 4 stars, Spanish. 0.5 star. Easily the worst Predator movie and one of the worst movies ever. No, not one of the worst movies ever. I didn't fall asleep. I wanted to continue on because I wanted to see if it would make me laugh. It didn't. It came close with the big bad villain blowing his own head off with the Predator technology. That could have worked. I mean, that really was a wasted opportunity. I think that could have made people fall out of their chairs laughing if it had been done right, foreshadowed properly, but it wasn't. It was a missed opportunity. 4 stars. Predator came back with a full force with this movie. They charged up the recipe of the other Predator movies. The kills in the movie were awesome, and the acting was really good. The plot was a little underwhelming, but had a few laughs. No, there were no laughs. 1 star. This movie just ruined the franchise. What a bad joke. Yeah, I agree. Bad joke. I wasn't laughing and I wanted to. 2.5 stars. 5 out of 10. It's a bit bad, but bad. 0.5 star. Absolutely speechless. 1.5 stars. The Predator has run out of prey and ideas. Instead, it relies on jumbled storytelling, humorless jokes, and boring action. 0.5 star. A piece of crap cash grab. Last minute milking of the franchise. Lame story. No actual Predator-style conflict with people. Weak characters. Weak and cheap jokes. A let's laugh together at T-800 saying talk to the hand-esque instant turd. I agree. The comedy, it tries, but it just doesn't land. 4 stars. This movie is cool. No, you're drunk. 0.5 star. By far the worst thing I've ever watched in a theater. Not only is this film an insult to Predator fans, but it's just a terrible film, period. I agree with this. If you saw this in the theater, yeah, it's going to make you angry because you weren't expecting a comedy, especially one that you didn't laugh. It was a waste of your money. As a watch on home video, maybe after a beer or so, I'd say it's worth watching just to see how bad it can get. It's not a total waste. 2 stars. As someone who acted in the original and may have even had an uncredited hand in the script, you'd think Shane Black would have a decent grasp on what made that movie work so well. So how did this go so wrong? Not only is the story incredibly silly in nearly every way and full of plot holes, but it also has the characters, including the Predators, make some very stupid decisions that are difficult to ignore. Thankfully, the cast is pretty great and has the necessary chemistry and Black's signature. That it brings up a good point. When he says, including the Predators, made some very stupid decisions. Like the big bad Predator, the big guy, he let the main characters escape on the bus and then immediately sent a message to his superiors out there somewhere that he's tracking the stolen alien technology. Like he just let them go for the sake of continuing the plot. Now I think that's it's nonsensical and it's a plot hole. But it would have worked in an action comedy if he had actually made a joke at that point, or if he had had some kind of funny sense of humor, that was translated as other statements of his were translated on screen. It could have worked. But as a serious movie, it just comes across as a WTF, like it doesn't make any sense. Half a star, awful, part of the franchise, terrible acting, FX, jokes, plot. 1.5 stars, the worst Predator movie I have ever seen, lacking in development and so many plot holes it's like Swiss cheese. 1.5 stars, so dumb, on 100 opportunities to kill the main character, but no, the Predator had to wait because he has to die. You are trying to make me believe that the Predator, when he has the chance to kill the father or the girl, he wouldn't do it. Come on, he only will throw them really good effects. Again, the things the Predator did, he let them drive away on the bus without making any attempt to stop them. He actually did throw the characters several times instead of just crushing them or slashing them with the flick of his wrist, like even the small Predator had been shown to do. It was trivial to kill a human, and yet when it came to the main characters, he never actually tried to kill them. He just tried to toss them really far so that they would, go on to fight further in the film. Completely stupid, but it would have worked in an action comedy, again. Half a star. Halfway through watching this movie, your eyes will hurt from all the eye rolling you'll be doing at the cringy dialogue. Please forget about this abomination and spend some time with your family instead. I can agree with that. 2 stars. I was expecting Shane Black to stick to the original instead of just shooting for the R rating. The movie was more of a comedy than anything else. The Predator had some good moments, but the movie fell short of being just as great as the original. Exactly. If you had been laughing, you wouldn't be saying it was rotten. 5 stars. It had great comic relief while still keeping the key elements of Predator. I'm excited about the next. I really don't see how anyone could dislike it. Then you're really forgiving on your comedy because it wasn't that funny. Half a star. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen. The whole idea of the original movies has disappeared, and now it's a regular action movie for the stupid viewer. What to say about war criminals with various deviations? The feeling that the American army without problems take people with mental illness. Authors should also look at autistic people in life. It is weird. This movie not only incorporated autism and made fun of that, but it also attempted to make fun of other types of mental illness, and it also portrayed mental illness as being common in the military, that all these people with these weird problems would be locked up together. It makes no sense outside of just an action comedy vehicle. But it does make some weird statements about mental illness. Again, if it had been done right, action comedy wise, it would have worked. If you try to read politics in this, though, you could probably find several ways in which you might need to boycott or start a campaign against it. I don't recall that happening with this movie because just nobody took it serious enough. Half a star. This movie made me physically ill. How could someone from the original movie make this piece of shit? Well, Shane Black was just a character in the original movie, and his character mostly delivered comedic lines, so it fits with that. But again, I say he's just like a director that shouldn't be directing. Half a star. Worst movie ever in my last 10 years. This movie just raped the whole damn series before. Make no sense at all. Even the CGI looks like it's from the 70s. I know it's an action movie, but built on a goddamn good sci-fi universe, but it's not shown at all in the movie. Just that, goddamn, I hate this too much. I even registered to this damn page and IMDb just to set its rating to possible worst. I never did that before, not even for Terminator Genisys. Okay, yeah, there's some angry fans out there. 5 stars, hilarious and violent, just like the original. No, the original wasn't supposed to be a comedy. Okay. 1 star, except for the good Predator design and a handful of jokes, the movie offered me nothing entertaining or whatever. Yeah, I disagree. I don't even think the handful of jokes landed. They just didn't. 1.5 stars. There seems to be a trend going on in cinema where old franchises get rebooted with over-the-top CGI and annoying comic relief meant to distract people from the poorly conceived plot. Sort of like nudity in B-horror movies, except not as entertaining. Yeah, he brings up a good point in this review. This could have worked in an action comedy of long ago in which there were a lot of breast scenes. You know, one of those movies where you can do a running breast count in the movie and say, well, oh, there were 14 cases of exposed breasts and 2 butt shots and etc. It would have worked in the past. And again, it's missing that. It's kind of like a family-friendly action comedy with like comical gore, and it just doesn't work. Yeah, 0.5 star. Without a doubt, one of the worst movies ever made. 3 stars. I think it would have been a much better movie without so much use of the F word. I don't mind hearing it or even saying it once in a while, but it was in almost every sentence in the movie. Other than that, the movie was entertaining. I didn't notice that. I think for an action comedy, it wasn't overused. It's just that it wasn't funny. 0.5 star. Terrible movie, killed the franchise. No, nothing's going to kill the franchise because, again, the franchise is not some cohesive thing that has some kind of epic narrative that's going between movies. Nobody can even figure out what the franchise is supposed to be about at this point other than just getting people to purchase more tickets. Nothing's going to kill it. This certainly didn't kill it. There will be more. 0.5 star. This movie was a complete joke. It was embarrassing to watch. I laughed several times throughout. Don't waste your time. I wish I had laughed several times. I tried. I thought I was going to at points, but I never did. 2.5 stars. Entertaining at best, but it respects the basics of the genre. Keep your bar of expectations low, and you should get what you came for, which is a pretty good thing we don't always get with this kind of movie. I disagree. If you're expecting to laugh at an action comedy, you didn't laugh. If you're expecting, you know, a serious action sci-fi movie with horror elements, you're completely insulted. No. 0.5 star. The script was beyond stupid. Nothing made sense. No sequence was plausible. Characters had information they should not have had and said and did things that were idiotic constantly. What a waste. I agree. How does the autistic kid know how to speak Predator and etc.? 0.5 star. Someone should be shot for making this. 2.5 stars. The rating on this may be a bit low, but man, this movie is bad in so many ways. Feel bad for Our Lady Mun. So many bad movies. There are minor things that makes this movie okay, but they fly by, so watch for them. You know, that brings up something. Some of the actors, they've had strings of bad movies, but I wonder if they're not told before this thing started shooting that this was meant as an action comedy, and so to them while shooting it, it seemed normal. That could be a possibility. If you had told Olivia Munn that this was an action, serious sci-fi horror, she might have recognized, hey, it's going to be garbage. But if you had told her, hypothetically, hey, this is going to be action comedy, this is where it's going, people are going to laugh their asses off, and it's going to get high reviews as an action comedy, then maybe she would have thought that, you know, this was going to work and that her character was going to work. So it's hard to say what they're told. You know, what they're told when they practice for their roles. They clearly were told to play up the comedy. It's just that it didn't work. 1 star. The whole global warming thing is stupid. The kid who had mental problems is actually a genius and learned alien tech and language in a couple of hours and becomes an expert in everything Predator. typical predictable Hollywood writing with politics woven in. I disagree. I didn't see any politics. There was one line that the villain character, the government agent, said that, well, humans don't have that many generations left, maybe one more before, our environment is destroyed. It was just a throwaway line. No, I don't see the politics. Half a star. Of all the things they've done to my beloved Predator, this is the most unforgivable. 1/2 star is 500% too much. Yeah, I agree. Failed action comedy. 2 stars, a hot fun mess, great costumes and special effects and actions, but does not add up. Well, speaking of costumes, again, I say they wasted the Halloween setting. They could have done so much more with that and got a lot of laughs. I think the trick-or-treating Halloween part was maybe 5, 6 minutes, something like that. It felt like that. I think if it had been more like 35, 40 minutes, this would have been funny. They just didn't take advantage of it like they should have. Half a star. This movie was just so bad. The main problem that I myself found with this movie is that it felt like it was trying to be a Marvel superhero movie, and it just did not work. Fans do not want to see their favorite movies changed. Predator should be taken seriously as the originals were. Violent horror, not quirky and humorous. There wasn't enough character set up to make you feel for the characters. Instead, we were just repeatedly bashed by bad humor through the whole movie, and it just did not work. I agree with this, but remember, the first Predator movie did have some one-liners. They had those classic Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liners that were comedy. Yeah, I think it's not true saying that the original didn't have comedy. It was 100% serious. No, it had comedy. It just worked, and it was sprinkled in just the right places. This one, it wasn't trying to sprinkle it in just the right places. It was trying to reboot the whole thing as an action comedy, and it just wasn't funny. 3.5 stars. Predator movies have never been too serious. They've always been about a badass and his team of badass misfits fighting against the super predatory aliens of the predatory species. This wasn't a perfect movie, but it fit with the genre of the others. I liked it. I'll eat your placenta if you didn't. Learn to enjoy movies for what they are. This reviewer saying, just take it as an action comedy. It's not that bad. Well, I disagree because okay, I agree it's an action comedy, but it didn't deliver the laughs, so it would still upset people that paid money to laugh. 2 stars, very poor story, lots of errors and poor acting. 3.5 stars. Here's the thing about this movie. I like it for its action, and I thought its story was good and well written. However, I felt this movie is also a disappointment because it was a little rushed, off-paced, and underwhelming. You're giving it way too many stars, even for what you've just said. It's a disappointment. It needs to be at 2 stars. I don't consider anything disappointing, in my opinion, to be a movie that I'm going to give more than 2 stars. Because, 2.5, 3 stars, you're saying it's in the middle of the road. But if you say it's disappointing, then no, you can't put it even at 3 stars, not in my opinion. Half a star, or 1 star, perhaps the worst movie ever. Wish I could vote 0 stars. The writers couldn't come up with dialogue, so they dropped the F-bomb every 30 seconds. Editing was beyond a farce, and the logic behind the action scenes was stupid. Bad direction, bad writing, bad film. Yeah, the editing was bad. Something that really stuck out to me that jarred me was the scene in which the dog-type predator gets lobotomized by the bolt gun. When the main character snuck up to the dog with the bolt gun, he did it in a comedic fashion. Literally, you can see it. Watch it again if you don't believe me. It was played as a straight-up comedy, him slinking up on it to deliver the shot with the bolt gun, yet it wasn't funny. So clearly they tried to play and ham up the comedy, but it just didn't work. 2 stars. Predators look cool. Fight scenes are cool. Bad story, awful directing, awful acting. But what do you expect from a Shane Black movie? I somewhat agree. I came across Iron Man 3 about a month ago. It just struck me how badly it aged, how badly a lot of the scenes aged, even the ones that weren't trying to be funny or edgy with humor. I'd say it's Shane Black. He's just not a good director, in my opinion. 3 stars. I thought it was an okay sci-fi action flick. Not one of the best, but not the worst either. Yeah, but a failure in the comedy department. Half a star. One of the worst movies I've seen in quite some time. Yeah, it could be. When this movie was released, it was the biggest name out there. I bet that the next one, even if we wait a couple of years before the next Predator release, if it has the movie Predator in its title, it won't be the biggest thing out there. It'll be panned before it's given a chance, just because of how this movie rubbed people the wrong way. 5 stars. In all honesty, this movie was better than I thought it was going to be. In all honesty, maybe you did laugh at the humor, in which case, okay, congratulations. I didn't get that. Um, at least somebody found humor in it. 2 stars. Not a good movie, but I had a little bit of fun watching it. It didn't feel like it knew its voice or direction. Yeah, it didn't know how to be funny. 1.5 stars. Horrible CGI. It makes it hard to watch. Plot holes aplenty. Cheesy scenes and acting. Franchise needs a total reboot and use more practical effects, please. Again, I don't see. Nobody's told me in these reviews that's mentioned the CGI, which parts of it really struck them as wrong. No, I didn't find the CGI bad at all. I found it completely passable. It didn't throw me out of what was going on. It was just everything else. The CGI is the least of the problem. I don't recall one problem. 1.5 stars. The dumbest mother effing movie that uses the most F words in order to pad out a super effing weak script. Point well taken. Half a star. This movie is a complete disaster. 3 stars. Not the worst Predator movie ever made, but not great. Again, Requiem, if you count that as a Predator movie, could be the worst. 2.5 stars. It's a good movie to see, but so far to be the best. The script is lazy in some parts. The cast makes the movie more funny, but it have some nonsense things in the plot. Disagree. They don't make it funny at all. The comedy fails. Half a star. This movie straight sucked. Sure, it was an action movie, but it ruined the Predator franchise. It was anything but what Predator was about. Poorly directed and too damn PC. Hollywood can't come up with original storylines and just crushes an already good movie franchise with today's let's make everyone happy something. Feel like I just watched my brother's kids playing fun, fair, positive soccer game where whether you win or lose, everyone gets a trophy. Again, that's because it's action comedy and it failed. It comes across like something for the kids that's pointless. 1.5 stars. This has to be one of the most disappointing movies ever. Eagerly anticipated, if for no other reason than having original cast member Shane Black directing it. I'll stop there and say no, I disagree. It wasn't eagerly anticipated. People's hopes and dreams about the Predator as a franchise were dashed long ago because no one can seem to take it in a worthwhile direction. So no, I completely disagree with that opening line. One would think that the original feel of the original classic would be present, but instead the plot is idiotic and the CGI is downright embarrassing, not to mention what is possibly the worst, most cloying ending in the genre. Predictable, pathetic, and sad to see the treatment of the once magnificent franchise. Again, I'll disagree. Which parts of the CGI? I wish they would, nail this down because I didn't find that the CGI was the issue at all. 1 star. What a joke. A spaceship with turbine and alien technology you could just download. Again, yeah, that works with the action comedy aspect. Part of the plot involved at the end one of the characters suiciding himself into the turbine of the alien predator ship. And it's like a turbine, like, a more sophisticated version of an aircraft turbine, with the same result, happening to the character that threw himself into it. It's action comedy straight up. It didn't work. It wasn't funny. It was one of the ones that kind of almost made me kind of laugh, but it didn't quite land. Again, the ridiculousness of the alien ship having an aircraft turbine on it. It's not too over the top if you explain that that's just for atmospheric use. But it's like it was put there to be part of the action comedy. That's why they put that mechanism there. And again, I have to judge this as a failed action comedy. It's just more circumstantial evidence to me. Half a star. One of the worst sci-fi movies ever. All that money spent on CGI and shoddy work on screenplay and writing. Did they even watch the movie after making it? I don't think they did because they would have realized the comedy didn't work. They could have just reshot dialogue. They could have reshot it for better timing. They could have made it into a straight up comedy on the reshoots. We're not talking about CGI that would have had to been redone or big set pieces. We're just talking about reshooting some of the stuff between the characters. It would have fixed a lot of this and made it a straight up action comedy. They didn't, so I say that the reviewer's probably right. They didn't watch it. 2 stars. This movie feels like it was specifically tailored to appeal to the dementia crowd. Any given scene works just fine, but if you try to string them together for a coherent narrative, you'll come up short. In the end, you're left asking too many questions. How does it make sense that the alien dog is now friendly? Why does the alien have human DNA? Olivia Munn gets naked for reasons. This movie will leave you longing for the Oscar-worthy performance of Mr. Jesse, I Ain't Got Time to Bleed, Ventura. They do bring up one thing. They do have Olivia Munn get undressed, but yet they don't show you anything, not even a small hint of her body. So, like I said before, you don't have like the running breast count that you would have in an old B movie. So it fails. They're trying to appeal to the kids, but what was the point of Olivia Munn taking her clothes off? Because there was no point to even get you to see her because you saw nothing. So again, it was a fail. You could say failed in yet another way. 4 stars. One of the best action movies I've ever seen. Shane Black hits it out of the park. Just a great ride. Great cast and extremely well executed. I've seen all the Predator, Alien, and Alien vs. Predator movies, and this is the best one out of all of them. I think that's saying a lot given how good all the Alien and Predator movies are. I see reviewing an action movie like this is a slippery slope. This movie does what it's supposed to do very well. It's not Shakespeare. It's just a fun... No, disagree completely. It doesn't do action comedy well. It does nothing well. It's a complete fail. I give it 2 stars because the production value, in my opinion, is still good. I don't have a problem with the CGI. I, for some reason that I can't put my finger on, watched this all the way to the end, and I think that's because I felt like I needed to laugh some more, like I was going to, and I just never got to. No, I completely disagree. This is a fail. 2.5 stars. The white guy who thinks he's Captain America ruins the whole movie. Yes, that's the point. Again, action comedy. The main character, he plays this like a Captain America type hero, even with his wife, telling us in some slow scenes about how, he's got all these medals and commendations and he is Captain America. Again, it's not used to any purpose because... it's over the top and comic booky, and it could have been, but it just like has no point to it. He doesn't do anything that seems like he's Captain America other than him jumping on the ship at the end in a crazy fashion that's like reminiscent of comic book Captain America. But again, that comes across as total comedy, and it doesn't work. 3 stars. I watched it expecting the worst, but instead found myself entertained. They could have toned the goriness down a bit, but that didn't really bother me. Again, I think I might agree with this reviewer. He probably thought that he was going to laugh out loud, or maybe he did at 1 or 2 points. But again, 3 stars, no way. It's 2. Half a star. Oh my God, was the worst B movie ever. Who the hell gave these idiots money to make this? I want the 1 hour and 47 minutes of my life back. It felt actually longer than 1 hour and 47 minutes. I'll chalk that up to the fact that it failed, and movies that aren't entertaining you do seem longer. Half a star. It is not often that a film is such an epic failure and utter disappointment as this film. This is definitely the worst film I have ever seen, period. As a longtime fan of Predator movies, I really don't expect much. I mean, let's face it, none of the sequels are even in the same league as the first, but the first was so good. We tolerate mediocrity from the sequels, but this is a travesty. It was so bad I would have demanded my money back if I bought tickets. Instead, I'm literally considering canceling. Maybe he's going to cancel his Netflix or something, I don't know. Again, if this had made people laugh, it wouldn't have pissed them off, but the comedy didn't work. 3 stars. I like the movie except when the tall predator enters the scene. The tall predator was just, if you were taking this as a serious action movie, you would say the director and the writer just couldn't come up with anything. That was all they had. They were creatively bankrupt, so to speak. But as an action comedy, it would have worked fantastic. They just didn't do it. 1 star. A huge disappointment to the Predator franchise. The plot is all over the place. The dialogue between characters sounds like it came out of a B movie, and overall it was just boring, with no real focus on any characters or story. The only reason this movie gets 1 star is because the lunatics are actually funny. I disagree. If they were funny, you probably would have given it 2.5, 3 stars. They weren't funny. 1 star. Campy, bad acting, poorly written story, characters and situations that are not at all believable, not at all to be considered as a real addition to the original story. This seems like a Disney attempt at PG-13 sci-fi. I'll agree, it does seem like that family-friendly action comedy. Even the gore is kind of like cartoony. So, yeah, I'll agree with that. 5 stars, Spanish. 2.5 stars, completely unbalanced. Yeah, but with comedy, it wouldn't have been. 2.5 stars. It's kind of fun, and one scene in particular takes care of bullies, but it's the weakest link in the franchise and is morally flawed and flawed in general. It does have its good moments, though. Well, they're referring to the Halloween scene where one mean kid on the balcony, he threw something at the autistic kid wearing the predator mask. The predator mask turned around and blew him to smithereens. Again, it's almost laugh out loud comedy, but it just wasn't set up or taken advantage of correctly. 3 stars. The hunt may have evolved, the formula has not. That being said, it does exactly what you'd expect it to do, an enjoyable watch. No, who are you trying to kid? 1 star, a new bottom for any Predator movie. 0.5 star, seriously, it's 2018 and you still need to rely on misogyny, making fun of disabilities, and making racist jokes to make a movie funny. Waste of time and money. Okay, again, if these jokes had worked, if people had laughed, nobody would be out there saying it was offensive, but it didn't work. 5 stars. Predator 2018 was a good movie. I'm going to stop right there. No, it's not. 0.5 star. Every macho cliche known to man is used, but what is unforgivable is the glamorizing of autism. Only because you didn't laugh at it. Now I'm going to probably stop there. In fact, I'm going to. I've made my point. This is an action comedy. The part about making fun of disabilities and whatnot, it's only offensive because nobody laughed. If it had been done better timing, some better comedy writing, it would have been hilarious. In fact, it reminded me almost of like the Charlie Sheen Top Gun spoofs. I can't remember their names at the moment, where basically they're spoofing off a Top Gun. Those are priceless, and this comes across in that vein to me, but a failed attempt at it where they didn't have a real comedy writer that knew what he was doing, or multiple comedy writers. Yeah, it could have worked as a comedy. I made my point. I don't think it's the worst in the franchise because there is no cohesive Predator franchise. I don't think there ever was, at least not after Predator 2. I wouldn't say it's dead. I'm sure we're going to get another Predator movie. I'm almost hoping that they bring back Arnold Schwarzenegger and try this kind of action comedy, make fun of itself on a meta level, perhaps in the vein of a Last Action Hero. I would consider that fantastic if it were done properly and if it were marketed in that way so nobody was rubbed the wrong way. Again, I have the bad feeling that they're going to attempt more serious Predator movies, and it doesn't matter what they do, nobody will take it serious at this point. So my only hope for the franchise would be to reboot it all as a comedy. There are some other franchises I think this could work for. Predator is number one. I hope I see it someday. I don't think I will. In any case, I'm going to call it, and I'm going to end this episode of Rotten Reviews. And I will see you on the next one.